empezar esta rueda.
Good afternoon. We're going to start this press conference to put an end to the two-day visit of the PEGA committee from the European Parliament investigating the spyware use. As you know, we have 10 MEPs forming part of this committee. They are several nationalities and a final declaration, which has reached the consensus of all political groups, and then you will have a chance to translation into Spanish in channel number 1 and into English in channel number 2. So we're going to read this final declaration now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Before I... Does it work like this?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Before I start reading out my final, the final declaration of the delegation visit, let me first take this opportunity to thank Maria Andres Marin and the whole staff of the European Parliament Liaison Office for the hospitality shown to us over the past 2 days, and the possibility to make use of the facilities here in the building is very much appreciated. I would also like to thank our interpreters, the technical staff, for all the work they've been doing and for making our meetings here possible in both English and Spanish, and of course to our colleagues and to all advisors of the European Parliament with us these 2 days. It was a very pleasant mission in that sense, with the constructive cooperation of all of us, so thank you. As you already said, we came to Madrid for a 2-day mission. We had 10 members of the European Parliament representing 6 member states, 6 different nationalities, and also 6 different political groups from the European Parliament. So it was a very broad representation, and we've had the chance to talk directly to authorities, people allegedly targeted with spyware, and civil society representatives. Now, these discussions, as they were intended to as well, helped us to gain a better understanding of the current framework for spyware, the reported cases of abuse of spyware, and plans for future legislative reform. We realized that the timing of our mission was challenging for our hosts, with a regional holiday yesterday and a political debate on a motion of censorship ongoing in parallel with our meetings today. So we would like to thank all our interlocutors for taking the time to meet with us. Yesterday we met with Pascual Navarro, State Secretary for European Affairs, who spoke to us about the legislative initiatives the government plans to increase transparency and to align with EU standards with regard to the investigations carried out by the intelligence services. These include the revision of the decades-old law on official secrets and the legal framework governing CNI, the National Intelligence Center. I think broadly we welcome these reforms, which are steps in the right direction, and we'll be interested in seeing how fast they are going to be adopted and implemented, especially given also the upcoming elections. According to the government, the CNI has already faced scrutiny from the government following the spyware scandal, and it remains a question why the changes to the law and the replacement of the CNI president took place if actions of state security bodies were actually legitimate. It would have been useful to hear more about this and to clarify these questions with the responsible minister, Mr. Bolaños himself. We also met with the inquiry committee of the Catalan Parliament, and at this point I would like to say that we are not here to take any position on the Catalan independence movement as a whole, as this is a national matter, but in any case it was very useful to speak directly to people who suspected that they were targeted with spyware. Among them also our meeting with the victims. this morning's Mr. Pere Aragonès, President of the Regional Government in Catalonia, Meritxell Serret, who is a Catalan Minister of Foreign Action, yes, and also a colleague from the Council of Barcelona. Overall, it seems that the legal framework in Spain is in line with fundamental rights protection, and several judicial proceedings are ongoing for the cases that should be further investigated, as victims of spyware deserve more information and transparency. And although surveillance can be legal in well-defined circumstances, the targets have the right to access legal remedies. Based on the statements provided by the alleged victims, we got the impression that this has not always been the case, stating that court cases have been dragging on for a long time without action, and that people felt that their concerns had not been investigated impartially and neutrally. One reason being that the results of the investigations have not been disclosed to the public, citing national security reasons. We urge the authorities to expeditiously cooperate with the courts to allow for maximum transparency, to create trust in the legal system in which everyone should have the chance to have their claims investigated in an impartial and thorough manner. Now, of course, it appears that spyware use in Spain cannot be attributed to any single instance or group of people. It is not clear who exactly, for instance, spied on members of the Spanish government, although third countries, many factors hint to Morocco, seem plausible suspects. During our meetings, it has not become fully clear why only 18 of the 65 reported cases have been substantiated by a court order, as stated by CNI. It remains an open question to our committee how 47 people have received credible alerts of infection without any further evidence of judicial proceedings against them. People who suspect they have been spied upon do deserve transparency and thorough investigations, and in order to provide more clarity and contribute with technical expertise, Europol could be invited and support that proper forensic process will be followed. We take note of the investigations already conducted by the Ombudsman and the High Court, while we acknowledge that there is scrutiny on the use of executive power in Spain. Even so, there are those who feel that individual investigations have proceeded slowly, and we hope that they can conclude it in due course to dispel any remaining doubts. This visit, like our previous visits to Israel, Poland, Greece, Cyprus, and Hungary, has given us food for thought as we prepare our recommendations for what Member States and the EU should do next to protect people's rights to privacy and private communications, along with other fundamental rights. And we will continue that work under the leadership of our Rapporteur, Sophia IN T VELD. In the EU, we already have vital legal safeguards, such as the European Convention on Human Rights, the GDPR, and the e-privacy directive, and we need to ensure that these are fully enforced. While we believe that Spain has an independent justice system with sufficient safeguards, at the same time we see the need to implement new rules or structures that could help prevent abuse cases in the Union and address this new form of intrusive spyware. Thank you for your time. Please follow our work in the coming months as we finalize our findings and recommendations, and I happily pass the floor to our Rapporteur, Sophia IN T VELD, for her reflections.
Yes, thank you and good afternoon, everybody. I will just add a few details, maybe. First of all, to be clear where we are already in the middle of the negotiations on the report, in other words, the conclusions of the committee, but our findings of this visit are going to feed in still to the report. I think exceptional of cases. It cannot be used, exceptional of cases. It cannot be used, frivolously just to fight regular crime. It only has to be used in cases where there is a very clear and present danger for national security. And I have to say that various countries. Now, there are always two dimensions to a parliamentary inquiry. One is making policy recommendations, looking at the future, but another dimension is clearly also establishing what happened, because justice has to be done. You cannot look at the future if justice is not done and if the facts are not on the table. Therefore, let's say, clarification and recommendations are equally important. That by way of general remarks. Then, to the first question, what went on, what happened? It turns out it's incredibly difficult to establish that, because we get actually, little to no official information, and here we already find ourselves in a kind of vicious circle whereby the information was obtained mainly through Citizens Lab and Amnesty International. That is how people became aware of the fact that they have been targeted. But then if they file a complaint before a court, the court says, yeah, but you have to prove that you were targeted and that it was by the government. But the only one that can give you that information is that same government. So in order to get justice, you have to rely on the very authorities that are probably behind the spying. That's a big problem. And if looking at the case in Spain, because it's a situation we see across many countries, but here, for example, there have been court cases, but those court cases have been put on hold until there is official confirmation of the fact that people have been targeted. But as long as the authorities refuse to share that information, as long as information is classified, how are they going to prove that? Now, 18 cases we know have been authorized by a court, but even that court authorization raises some question marks, because as I understand, in the Spanish legal system there are two kinds of authorizations. One is an authorization for a real-time wiretap for a maximum of 3 months. The other one is for entering a home, and that authorization is valid for 24 hours. But here we're talking about granting access to everything, which is even more than there is in your home, even retroactively. So you see that the rules in place are no longer valid, because if a court, in these 18 cases for example, has authorized real-time wiretapping for 3 months, then if spyware is used, then that authorization is actually giving access to everything. What I also find worrisome is that although the cases that we're looking at indicate the activity or the use of spyware over several years, a period of several years, I think we have indications going back to 2018 all the way up to next year. That's a long period of time. A number of people, as I said, have been targeted with spyware, but no criminal charges have been brought so far. So if there were a real imminent threat, or if people were really engaging in criminal activity, then you would expect there to be criminal charges. That's not the case. As Jeroen already said, 47 cases are unaccounted for. People have been targeted, or there have been hacks or attempted hacks, but we have no idea who's behind it. Was it the CNI? Was it somebody else? Was it? We don't know. And that means that those people have no legal remedy at all, because the fact that they were targeted isn't even recognized. So on paper there's a robust legal framework with rights for victims, but we see that in practice there is no real legal remedy. There just isn't. The victims are stuck, and that is problematic. In Spain there is a legal definition of national security, which is good, the fact that it exists. But if you read it, it's so broad that it covers almost anything. But I think it has to be made very clear and very explicit that ideas, no matter how crazy you may think they are, can never be a threat to national security. That has to be crystal clear. Now, with regard to recommendations, and this is also in the draft report, Jeroen also said it, full clarity will have to be provided. We call on the Spanish authorities to make sure that there is full clarification and justice is done. We also call on the Spanish authorities to ensure meaningful legal remedy to the people who have been targeted, and all of them, all 65 cases, and maybe there are others out there. We welcome the legislative reforms which have been initiated, but we would really urge the authorities to wind them up quickly and not wait until the next legislator, but do it rapidly, because I understand the law on scrutiny of secret services goes back to 1968. I would say that there's plenty of reason to change that law. I think, as we have recommended generally in the report as well, there should be a definition of national security, which there is here, but the question is whether it isn't too broad and whether it shouldn't be narrowed. Transparency and rights of citizens, rights of victims should be enhanced, and that includes the rights of victims to be notified once the surveillance is over. You know, when there's no more surveillance and it's clear that people will not be charged with anything, they should have the right to be notified and get access to their files. Finally, Jeroen already mentioned Europol, because I have noted that in Spain, and Spain is really the only country from all the countries that we're monitoring, in Spain there are, the neutrality and the authority of Citizen Lab are challenged a lot. I think all the accusations of bias have been adequately rebutted. Citizen Lab rigorously applies academic standards, that's very clear. That being said, we clearly do need a European Citizen Lab at the service of all citizens who suspect that they may have been targeted. But until such time, until we have such a European Citizens Lab, countries, and that goes for Spain as well, should invite Europol to assist with the forensic examination of the devices. And I think that would be a very helpful step in the current deadlock in Spain, and it might actually help both the victims and the judiciary to advance the court cases which are now in suspense. So we would strongly recommend that Europol be invited. Thank you.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Pues ahora es el momento de las preguntas.
Thank you very much. It's now time for questions. If you want to ask any questions, please state your name and the media you work for. Please pass on the mic.
La tercera fila.
Hola, buenas tardes. Soy Montse Basa de TV3. Tengo dos preguntas concretamente. Una, me gustaría saber cuál ha sido su reacción ante que se nos ha sorprendido la reacción del gobierno español y de las instituciones españolas a su visita. Ustedes habían invitado al presidente del gobierno español, algunos de sus ministros,
some of the ministers, and finally you've been received by a state secretary. Were you expecting more than that? What was your reaction
a estas audiencias que han tenido?
To
y la segunda, un poco de qué creen que tendría que servir el informe que ustedes van a elaborar y que se va a tener que aprobar en el Parlamento Europeo. Realmente, ¿cuál tiene que ser el objetivo de su estudio y de esta investigación? Gracias.
Well, thank you very much. On the program, as I indicated in my speaking notes, we realized that we come at a particularly difficult moment with the public holiday yesterday and today the debate in the Parliament on the motion of censure. We were in the Parliament earlier today. We got to see the debate on the motion of censure on the video screens, and with the lengthy debate that we witnessed, I understand that it was difficult for the Prime Minister to step out and meet us. So I do have understanding for the circumstances and the fact that the government was represented in the shape of a state secretary is better than nothing. We had, for instance, the situation in Poland and Hungary before, where the government, the authorities, flat out refused to meet with us. Now, of course, like I also said in my introduction, we would have preferred to meet with other members of the government, both in terms of members of the government who are more directly responsible for the topic at hand, and those members of the governments who have also been understood as victims of targeting of Pegasus by potentially third countries. So in that sense, yes, it is disappointing that we didn't get to meet more members of the government, but as I also said, I have understanding for the circumstances in which our mission take place and the timing of it.
Maybe I can add something, because there may be understanding for the fact that these days were particularly difficult, but we also have to recognize that we have been doing this work for a year now. All the governments have had the opportunity to share any information they wanted and meet with us whenever they wanted. We also have to recognize that all governments, all, have stonewalled the inquiry, because it's true that in some cases we may have met with government representatives and it was all very friendly and polite, but we never got any meaningful information. So, and what's the purpose of the investigation? Of the report? We're still negotiating, so I cannot preempt the outcome, but I think there is a general consensus that we need to regulate both the use of and the trade in spyware, because we're not just talking about potential violations of individual fundamental rights, the privacy of the individual, but also a threat to democracy. If, I don't know, opposition politicians or even politicians of government parties in some cases, journalists, lawyers, NGOs, activists, what have you, whistleblowers, if they can be targeted with spyware and if they can be intimidated, blackmailed, monitored, harassed, discredited, then that is a direct attack on democracy. So I think it is very important that in Europe we regulate this and make sure that governments are accountable. And that means that can you use spyware in legitimate situations for fighting and legitimate and exceptional cases for fighting, I don't know, terrorism and the most serious forms of crime? Yes, but we must make absolutely sure that spyware cannot be used anymore by European governments or government parties against opponents and critics.
Muy bien, muchas gracias. Siguiente pregunta.
Thank you very much. Next question. Here.
Gracias. ¿Qué tal? Soy Mario Saavedra.
Thank you, Mario Saavedra from the periódico in Spain. If you can hear me well, I would like to know if you could explain a bit more why are you saying that Morocco would be the plausible perpetrator of that cyber attack, cyber espionage?
Well, like I think we indicated in our first statement, we don't have any proof that whichever third country was behind the targeting of the Prime Minister and members of the government. We even had interlocutors in our mission today and yesterday who even refused to comment on this and refused to comment on the potential links with Morocco out of fear of retaliation from the Moroccan authorities. Now, that sort of, for me, already makes it plausible. I think if you look at the timing of the targeting, combined with developments in Morocco and in Spain, there would be a logic there. But like I said, we don't have any proof. This is a plausible candidate, but we would need to find out more about this, and it would be also helpful in that sense if the authorities could provide more information about this targeting, because one of the things that was underlined during our meetings by members of our delegation is that, of course, once a prime minister or ministers of a government, regardless of whether this is in Spain or Austria or the Netherlands or Slovakia, once they are targeted with spyware, it potentially means that this is also a European Union issue when members of government travel to Brussels for council meetings, for the European Council. If their phones are spied upon, we all know what the capabilities of spyware like Pegasus are. Then it's not only a matter of Spanish, Dutch, Austrian, Slovakian national interest, but it also becomes a matter of European interest. And I think a little bit more European coordination in that respect would be most welcome.
Maybe two additional points, because the same allegations or suspicions exist when it comes to the targeting of the French president and government ministers. And the real question is, this is already some time ago, and you really wonder why in both countries the magisterial inquiry has not advanced. Because you'd expect there to be a general interest in getting the facts on the table. Of course, we recognize that it's delicate, but still, as my colleague said, members of a government, ministers and government leaders and heads of state, they're also members of the Council and the European Council. They're European legislators. They're coming together, taking decisions on, and they're corresponding, taking decisions that affect the entire European Union. So this is very much a European matter, and it's quite worrying that national governments act as if it's a purely internal matter.
Una pregunta en fondo, creo.
One more question behind. Yes. Where do you come from, please? I'm from RAC-U. Referring to the treatment you've received by the Spanish government, we know it was a local holiday yesterday, and today we had the motion for censorship, and I see that they didn't receive you. You had foreseen a meeting and no one came.
Today we had planned a meeting with the Defense Committee of the Spanish Parliament, the Cortes Generales, and indeed we went there. We knew, of course, in advance that it would be a difficult meeting in terms of timing because of the debate on the motion of censure. So we were received in the room. We had a lovely lunch. The ham was excellent, but unfortunately, and I really say unfortunately, the debate, the plenary debate, which had foreseen a break at 1 o'clock, was delayed significantly. We could follow the debate from the room we were in. We could also see that it took longer than expected. We were in touch with the president of the Defense Committee, who was in the plenary room. He kindly offered to find a new slot for the meeting, either today or tomorrow, which unfortunately did not synchronize with our already made travel plans. So we made the agreement that we would look and see if there would be an opportunity, maybe with digital means, to have this meeting at a later stage between the European Parliament's Inquiry Committee and the Spanish Parliament's Defense Committee. So, I mean, concluding, I think there was a willingness to meet with us, but the extraordinary circumstances of today's plenary session made it impossible, which is regrettable. But there is a willingness to make sure that this meeting will take place in the near future. Unfortunately, not in Madrid, but through digital means.
Siguiente pregunta. Aquí.
Next question, please. Jaume Big from National Comunitat. What the European Parliament could have foreseen it was that this was on Monday it was a holiday, a bank holiday in Madrid. You could have foreseen that because this is in the calendar. This is my question. Was that not foreseen?
Well, we were informed because our calendar normally tends to mark the national holidays of the member states, not necessarily regional or local holidays. So when we selected these dates for the mission to Madrid, we were not aware of the fact that on Monday there was a public holiday here, and we were certainly not aware of the fact that there would be on Tuesday a motion of censure debate, which was also not planned at the time. At the same time, we wanted to make sure that we could have a visit to Spain. Many of our colleagues think it's important to come to Spain and to discuss with interlocutors. And what we also want to do, we want to do this before any campaigning period or electoral period starts. And we know that quite soon there will be regional elections in Spain, which are important elections in this country. So we also want to act as a respectful partner and not come here during an electoral period. So therefore we chose these dates, and of course many of the interlocutors were willing, and we thank them very much, to meet with us yesterday as well. We met with civil society organizations, we met with journalists yesterday, we met with the state secretary on the public holiday, so that also maybe owes him an extra round of gratitude, and to his staff. So in that sense, I don't think it negatively impacted our mission. I think the motion for censure today was a more difficult factor, which we didn't know at the time of the planning, and which was also hard to predict in the way the debate would take place today.
¿Hay alguna pregunta más?
Any other question? Let's ask several questions at the same time. Good afternoon. Cadena SER Radio. About the willingness of the government to reply to your questions. The motion of censorship was planned more or less a week ago, and I think the mission was planned before then. So I would like to know whether before you knew the date of the motion of censorship, did you manage to agree any meeting with any minister of the government that had to be cancelled due to the debate in Parliament? Or what was the willingness of the government to meet with you? And last week, facing this difficulty, did you think of cancelling this visit? Next question. Good afternoon. A very specific question. You mentioned the possibility of Europol investigating the mobile phones for the suspicions that the analysis was not done correctly, or maybe another agency who will be in charge. Will this be a recommendation on your report from your committee? Francesca Campo from Spanish TV.
Thank you. On the first question, I'm a little bit surprised, if I may express myself in that way, that a lot of the questions seem to be about the organization of the meetings rather than the substance of our meetings. In all the missions we organize in the European Parliament, government appointments, ministerial appointments tend to be confirmed rather at the last moment, within the last week before the mission takes place. This goes for all member states. At least I personally am aware of. Maybe other people have different experiences. So in that sense, I did not feel that there was a strong desire by the Spanish authorities to boycott our mission. It was not the Prime Minister himself who tabled a motion of no confidence in his government. So that I really think was we don't know. It's a hypothetical question what kind of mission we would have had, who we would have had met should the dates be different. But our consideration in deciding whether or not to let this mission take place is whether we felt that the mission would have added value, whether the program we could do together would be informative and useful. And I think ahead of the mission we decided that it was, and I personally believe, and I think this is also the opinion of the delegation as a whole, that looking back it was absolutely useful to be here these 2 days, and that the interlocutors that we did speak offered very interesting perspectives on the matters that we are discussing. On Europol, I will leave the question on the recommendations to Sophie. The only thing I can say is that from the inquiry committee, I have sent a letter already some time ago to Europol, because Europol is not only a matter about member states asking Europol for help. With the new mandate of Europol that we adopted, Europol has the opportunity and the power to request information from member states and to offer its services to member states. Now, Europol has done so, and not all member states have responded in equal levels of commitment. So this is something that, as a committee of inquiry, we will also continue to I think, push Europol to make use of the full opportunities of its mandate.
Yes, no, we have indeed encouraged Europol to make use of its new powers and propose at its own initiative to the member states, or certain member states where there are such issues, to do a joint investigation, because Europol cannot operate without the explicit consent of the member state concerned. That's not possible. But we see, across Europe, there are a couple of member states where there are problems with the use of spyware, or rather the abuse of spyware, or alleged abuse of spyware. Europol has huge expertise. They have a cybercrime unit. They are always assisting member states with forensic investigations, and I think in this case it would be very useful, because the authorities, the courts here, are saying we cannot advance with the court cases when we do not have any evidence other than the evidence given by Citizens Lab. And by the way, of course, the courts could also accept the expertise offered by Citizens Lab. They can decide that that is sufficient evidence, but they say we want more evidence. We want a sort of formal confirmation, and Europol could assist with that and give a kind of how shall I put it? Give it a kind of provide more reassurance and confidence. With regard to the first question, I'm not going to say anything about the organization of this specific mission, but we have to be honest. From day one, there's not been any appetite with any government, no government at all, to in any way cooperate with our inquiry, or indeed conduct inquiries in their own country. And then there are a couple of member states, like our own, for example, where there are no allegations of abuse of spyware by the government, but they are part of this collective silence. I've referred to it as omerta in my report, because they're all, covering each other. And as I said, they're all in the European Council together, or in the Council. They all meet up. They know that these problems exist. In some countries, we're not looking at abuse of spyware, but at violation of European export rules. Exporting spyware to countries, model democracies such as Sudan, Libya, and other countries, Saudi Arabia, where it's being abused against human rights defenders and journalists and what have you. And all the member state governments are silent, collectively silent. We have written a kind of questionnaire to all the member state governments, and they have chosen to collectively respond to our questionnaire. So we got a letter from the Council Presidency saying essentially, "Dear Parliament, this is none of your business. Greetings, the Council." I'm summarizing. But that was basically it. So they are collectively stonewalling the inquiry. And why is the European Parliament conducting an inquiry? Because in most countries where these problems present themselves, a national parliamentary inquiry is not held, or in any case not one which is actually shedding light on matters. And therefore, because you asked earlier, or one of your colleagues, what's the purpose? Apart from policy recommendations for the future, I think it's also very important to keep this issue on the agenda.
Gracias, creo que...
Thank you. I think there's another question at the back of the room. Thank you. You said that we're more concerned about the organization of the visit rather than the content. And one of the members of your delegation said this morning that it was one of the most difficult missions to organize. So you said it very explicitly. It has been said very explicitly. And this is quite telling in Spain, what you do and what you don't do. Any other question, or this will be the last one then?
It wasn't really a question. It was a statement, and you know, I cannot speak on behalf of individual MEPs. I've heard the same comments as you have heard, and I don't think personally that they're reflective of the way that this mission was organized. We have organized in total 5 missions now, and I don't see any objective reasoning why this one would be more or less difficult to organize than previous ones. I agree with what Sophia said, that in a general sense, none of the member states, including my own member states of the Netherlands, who has not replied as one of the few member states to our questionnaire at all, none of the member states are particularly eager to work with us. But like I started also, the first answer to our questions, at least here in Spain, compared to other missions we had, the government was represented by a state secretary. We had requested different names, but they were represented by a state secretary, which is something that would be unthinkable in earlier missions we had, particularly in Poland and Hungary. So every mission has its own difficulties, but certainly I can say from an organizational point of view, and I was very much involved in the organization, that it was not more or less difficult than any of the other missions we have organized.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you very much to everyone.